Hello and welcome to Food Freedom Milwaukee Radio. I'm Quinn Wilder, your host, founder of Food Freedom Milwaukee, and this show is about how we can build our own food system, hyperlocal food system in the 53212 and 53206 zip codes, because food sovereignty is our goal. Food sovereignty is the foundation for individual and community health. And we are experiencing multiple crises in our society today, many of which can be addressed, and to some degree at least resolved, through getting people together and growing food. So Food Freedom Milwaukee is dedicated to helping, assisting, and being a support and a resource for citizens in anywhere in Milwaukee, but focusing on those area codes or zip codes, who want to improve the environmental health of their neighborhoods and their environments, to create functional ecology that builds healthy soil, that builds clean air, clean water, absorbs carbon out of the environment, creates beauty and habitat and food for the pollinators that we need, as well as supporting, and those insects then in turn support the growing of food, so that there is a natural ecological checks and balances, so that one predator insect can't wipe out one crop. If there is a healthy functioning ecology surrounding a food garden, that food garden is going to have all kinds of critters that are going to be able to take care of those predators and not let them over dominate, which is something that healthy natural ecology does. Is it has natural checks and balances that create stability and predictability and nutrition and sustenance for everybody, for every living thing. So that's what Food Freedom is about. And today I don't have a guest planned unless I get a cameo appearance, which is possible. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what has been happening lately with Food Freedom, what we are doing, what we're trying to do, where we're headed, and how you can get involved and be part of the Food Freedom revolution and support food freedom in a variety of ways. One is to check out our website, and on our website at foodfreedommilwaukee.org, you will see a link to get on our text messaging list or email list, and that's the contact form. But then there's also a participation form, and if you click on that, it's a Google form that has questions for you to answer about what are your interests, what kind of things would you like to learn about or do with food freedom, and how would you like to support food freedom. And so that's a really great way for us to know what kinds of things you'd like to be invited to. Whether it's some educational things about growing food, some educational things about native plants, or maybe it's that you're interested in helping out a community garden, or maybe starting one. So we can just have an idea of kind of what you're really interested in doing. And that's really how we've built our volunteer base and built a whole food freedom community in this 53212, 53206 part of Milwaukee, where we have helped out our neighbors, gotten to know some of our neighbors better, and meet each other and learn together, where new friendships have flourished, and people generally have just been from really different backgrounds maybe, but have found that we have a lot in common around things like the Food Freedom Mission, and people have expressed a lot of satisfaction and contentment and joy in just getting together in some of our food freedom events, and meeting other people and really building community together around creating access to healthy food and creating food sovereignty from the ground up on our own. And that kind of leads me to just mention the last episode that we had 2 weeks ago with Courtney Wilkerson, where we talked about politics, and that was really the little pre-launch for what is going to be a new show that's going to talk about politics. And it's separate from Food Freedom, but in a lot of ways it's related. Because, I'm going to bring this up when our show starts tomorrow at, I think, 7 or 7:30. And it's also just a half-hour show, and that is right now scheduled to be weekly, although we may end up going every other week. But, why is it that we are struggling to create our own food system that actually delivers food sovereignty, delivers true access to healthy food? Why is that an uphill battle? And, the one answer I can come up with is that that's an uphill battle because, we know that the right to healthy food, to access to healthy food, is just one of the many rights that have been denied many people in America. It's just one. It's an important one. They're all really important. But why is it that we are continually being denied basic human rights in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, probably easily the wealthiest countries in the world, that talks about the value of freedom and the value of democracy and voice and the power of the individual, common, regular person to be able to, if you play by the rules, live a decent life. And why is that not happening for so many people? In fact, inequality just continues to get worse. And the only answer I can really come up with is essentially that what we're living in is a very extreme post-capitalist system that is really about profits. The only thing that is supported, the only thing that becomes reality is something that somebody can make money off of. And typically in an exploitative way. So it's hard to do that and deliver food sovereignty at the same time. So it's an uphill battle. And I think understanding what we're up against is important for figuring out how to exist within that system and work to change that system, at least to the extent that we start to make some progress in realizing some of these basic human rights, like the right to food sovereignty and food access for everybody. So let me talk a little bit about some of the things that has been happening. First of all, I got some incredible news, really great news. Just about an hour and a half ago, I got a phone call from Bader Philanthropies, which had received a grant that I wrote months ago. And I expected that it was going to be reviewed sometime maybe in the last week, but I wouldn't find out anything about it until late December, early January. And then I assume if we got it, funding would come a little while after that. And, I wasn't overly optimistic about it. I hadn't really made any connections with Bader, and I hadn't really gotten any guidance or, help with kind of formulating the grant proposal from them. I didn't really see any indications that they were particularly interested in funding something that was about, community gardening and food sovereignty, although I did know that they have been wanting to focus on building resources and supports in the Harambe community, which is where their offices have been located for some time now, since they moved there with that purpose. But I found out that, and it wasn't completely official or clear, but I guess they have some good news for me. So that is awesome to find out. And I expect that this would mean, if we get this grant, probably about almost a doubling of our budget, which is going to enable us to provide even deeper support to more sites more community gardens and support more people growing food together and realizing some degree of improved food sovereignty and food access. And of course, food knowledge, which has been kind of something that we've really emphasized, is that even if you handed a random person in a low income neighborhood a bag of produce, that it would be likely that that person did not have the food knowledge required to know what to do with that. And that it would be likely that that bag of produce would just get thrown in the garbage, just tossed. And so we have to bring food knowledge up along with food access in order to really create true food sovereignty, which is our goal. So I think that if we do get, particularly if we do get this additional support, that is going to mean we're going to really be able to ramp up our educational programming and have more demonstrations that engage community garden members, block members around the blocks of community gardens that we're working with, to help them bring more people in, create some attractive programming where maybe people learn how to do canning and get to go home with a few big cans of, let's say, tomato sauce, for example, or chili or something, spaghetti sauce, that they're going to be able to put in their freezers, or actually, since it's canned, put on a shelf, and then bring out during the winter, for example, and actually get extremely fresh, nutritious, healthy, and free food sporadically during the winter, which can really just have incredible value to people's health. If you think about, I think a lot about how a lot of children are getting a huge amount of sugary processed food that's not only devoid of real minerals and vitamins, but actually contributes to sickness and illness and conditions leading to things like diabetes, for example. But the list goes on as to the damage that is caused to the human body and brain, especially of growing children when they are essentially malnourished, even if they're getting a decent amount of calories from highly processed and sugary food. So really excited about building in that direction. Really excited about the things that are to come around that. And then I want to mention, so Food Freedom did what I thought was a pretty neat program this last summer. We offered, since there was a City of Milwaukee sponsored eco neighborhood program that was happening with the Harambe neighborhood, but had not been happening in River West, I decided, and they weren't going to be able to support a River West eco neighborhood initiative because that program was looking at probably ending, I think connected to Trump and Doge related cuts. So we decided to start our own Food Freedom sponsored eco neighborhood initiative where we offered up to about 10 homeowners or people with front yards who had the ability to do something in their front yards, even if they weren't homeowners, to have a free native plant installation in River West. And we ended up getting over 10 people. I think we now have something like maybe 15 front yard gardens in River West. Maybe a couple are backyards and a couple are actually outside of the River West neighborhood. But most of them now have food freedom signs in front, and I'm getting a lot of people saying, since we completed all those projects by the end of this last summer, a lot of people saying they see the signs around, and people are generally pretty excited and think it's pretty cool that this happened. And what we did was we engaged all the homeowners and then a bunch of our volunteers, and we had people. We had an event at Kumba where all the homeowners got a crash course in native plant design, native garden design, and they got some support from a very knowledgeable native plant person that's part of our volunteer corps in designing their garden. They then got to pick out the plants from that we had in the Kumba patio. These were all plants that Food Freedom raised at our nursery at the Cole Farm on the north side, and then volunteers came out, and we went and planted with the homeowners and some of their friends and some of our volunteers. We planted those gardens, and so now those gardens are going dormant for the winter. They have been building roots, and by next spring we should see some encouraging growth, although they're still going to be mostly putting their energy into growing their roots. But collectively, I imagine this probably represents about, maybe about 3,000 square feet of new native prairie gardens that are creating corridors of habitat and food for pollinators all around our neighborhood. So I'm really happy and proud about that. The next version of that that we're going to try, that we're already trying, has already started. And it's going to result in a bunch more beds in front or backyards or other community spaces all throughout the 53206 and 53212 neighborhoods. And what we've done is we've sent out the word using social media to invite people to be part of a process where you get to come out and learn from me and maybe some of our other volunteers, learn how to identify and native plants and harvest seeds. And then collectively we'll have kind of a seed library that we will use to learn how to overwinter or winter sow the native plant seeds outside in jugs. And then in the spring when the seedlings start to come up, learn how to pot them up and take care of them during the summer, keep them in the shade while they're really teeny in the high heat and sun. And then in the fall, they will have prepped their garden spaces and be able to plant the plants in, and then start that whole multi-year process before actually having a thriving, fully mature, ecologically functional garden. But this is going to add another dozen or so gardens to our portfolio of partners. At the same time, we're starting to really ramp up working with community gardens, and there is a few in our network. Our network is maybe about a dozen community gardens or school gardens, and many of them are still kind of figuring out what they need and how to partner with anybody, including us. And so we're I feel like a little bit on standby until there's some opportunity. Recently, there was one that didn't really know if they needed any concrete help from Food Freedom, but then they just had an event occur where they need some help, and Food Freedom is so far just providing a little bit of consulting. There might be a little help grant writing, and then doing some work and maybe bringing some volunteers to help, and also contributing native plants and things like that. But there's a couple new ones I want to talk about, and one of them is not really new, but it's really just starting to take off now, and that is the Nigella Community Garden in Williamsburg Heights. On this show we had Vanessa White with us, and she is part of the 5 Points Community Association or Neighborhood Association, and she was basically assigned to take a look at Nigella Community Garden and try to bring it back out of essentially a dormancy that it was in. And so Food Freedom is working with her on that, and we've had we just had an event in the garden where a few people came in and were interested in helping out and participating. So The next step is probably going to be we're going to start building some beds, and we're going to start finding more people that would like to have a raised bed there, and they'd like to maybe get some help learning about things they could grow and picking some things that they'd like to grow there. So that's going to be a really great process, and it's such a great neighborhood. That neighborhood is really close to the Adams. I mean, that community center is really close to the. I think the community center is on something like Second and Nash, and if you go another block north, there is the Adams healing space, Adams Park healing space, which also has a lot of potential, and it's just right on the north side of that same block. And so we're hoping to actually do things at both sites and kind of be on both ends of that block. But that area is also very close to another thing Food Freedom did this last year that I have some updates for, called the Beerline Community Gardening Resource Center. And we got a grant, a small grant from the CIP, the Community Improvement Program, where we got a pile of wood chips and a pile of compost put down on the north side of the Beerline Trail, and did a few things to promote it and encourage community members to come out and use these resources in order to support their community gardens or maybe their own individual gardens and grow food. And we got some incredible participation. Both of those piles pretty much are all the way down now, and they were big. And we got multiple stories from people and examples of how those resources were used and were really useful in doing what we had really been hoping from the beginning that we'd be able to do, which is really lower the barriers to getting people growing food, and especially growing food together, especially the cost barriers, maybe even the labor barriers, because there's a cost to, let's say, going to a landscaping place and buying a bunch of dirt. So there's cost in just buying it, but then there's cost in either having it delivered, or having a vehicle that you can put it in that can handle that, maybe a truck, or a bunch of giant bins or something, I suppose, which makes it a lot harder. Whether or not you have a wheelbarrow matters, and all these other resources. So lowering those barriers, especially of cost, but also of labor, is one thing that's a goal of this idea of a community gardening resource center. And we are planning on expanding that this year. So we've been working closely with the Friends of the Beerline, which is part of Riverworks, Milwaukee. And Friends of the Beerline has been doing a lot of great projects, and Food Freedom and myself have been out volunteering and doing things with that really great group, like creating a big pollinator garden just on Townsend and Holton. And we created some beds where we've grown garlic and supplied garlic to food businesses, local food businesses like Kumba, which we plan on continuing. But the Beerline, the Resource Center was a big part, was one of the big things that I think accomplishments from this last year that we plan on expanding. And so Friends of the Beerline, we had a meeting and talked about the things we'd like to do over the next year. And I brought up expanding that Community Gardening Resource Center. And there was overall support for that. So we're going to be talking with Riverworks and really work out kind of what we want this to be. What kind of things could a Community Gardening Resource Center do and be besides offering a pile of compost and a pile of wood chips? And I think there's some really exciting possibilities, including doing some programming, some educational stuff. So, and maybe offering the ability to have a bed, have a raised garden bed built, for example, maybe helping with the transportation for those that aren't physically able to do that. There's maybe being able to have access to tools, maybe even being able to, we're thinking about, I was talking this morning about working with I believe it's River West Tool Library, but maybe I'm thinking about having tools being able to get donated to Food Freedom and then just giving them away for free. Anybody that wants one that is trying to get into gardening. And again, just lowering those costs because, of course, tools cost money. And if having a free tool can enable somebody to start growing their own food, especially getting schools or community gardens growing their own food, kids, then that's worth it. And that's something we want to do. Let's see. A couple things that have been going on lately. We are gearing up at Food Freedom for having larger plant sales. We just dabbled in this a little bit, but in order to do fundraising, we want to be able to do more plant sales. So we want to grow enough native plants that there's plenty to go into the spaces of the partners that we're working with, like the school gardens and the community gardens, and then our kind of education and community awareness and community building events like the free front yards and the seed to seed program where people are collecting seeds and designing and planting their own gardens with support. But then we're going to have a surplus of plants, and so why not turn those into opportunities for fundraisers? And that's what we did this last year. We want to expand that and do more of that. And through some partners and people that I've talked about working closely with and partnering with, the idea of that others are doing already of creating fundraisers for organizations. So it can both be a fundraiser for Food Freedom to sell plants, but also to engage organizations in selling plants where they get a cut of the proceeds, and that is a fundraiser for them as well. So this could happen. It's a little bit like the Girl Scout cookie model, as my friend Nick Coley calls it. But, instead of having kids going out and selling candy, for example, and maybe the candy costs $3 and maybe the school gets 50 cents from that, or 25 cents from that $3 from each item sold. With native plants, I think we're going to be able to offer. So what I think that ends up often being is something like, I think it actually ends up being something like 10% maybe in a lot of cases for those kinds of traditional fundraisers where we know the benefactor of some of those profits is probably a for-profit organization. But in this case, we're nonprofit. It helps us, and then it also helps the organization. And they can get up to, I'm thinking 20 to 30%, so at least double what they would get by selling candy. And then it also creates so much more of a benefit to everybody, as well as the learning opportunity that it can represent for the people involved in the sales, which could be adults and parents, and could also be kids in a school, for example, or an after-school program, for example. So I'm excited about that continuing. And we just ran out of time. So I want to say thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.